how do we know whether something is true? Obviously, some theories are better justified than others. For instance, we have better reason to believe that the Earth is round instead of being formed like a cube, or like a donut. But what criteria can we use then to distinguish between theories and say that one is better justified than another? I'm suggesting that we use coherence as a criterion, but what does that mean then? Well, there are 3 sub-criteria that make up this criterion of coherence, and so we could say that coherence has 3 aspects. The first is consistency, that the different parts of a theory should not contradict each other, then the theory is consistent. But in addition, the parts of the theory should not merely not contradict each other, they should also be connected in different ways and in as many ways as possible, and that's what we mean by the criterion of cohesiveness, that there are as many connections between the different parts of the theory as possible. And the third aspect is comprehensiveness, that the amount of data that you are able to integrate into the theory will make the theory more coherent. And so I'm talking about data now. The parts of the theory are data, but by data we should not think of something which is certainly true. We should just think of it as a truth candidate, something that somebody believes to be true. It can be anything. These are data that we want to include in the theory. It will not be possible to include everything that people believe is true, so sometimes we have to say that probably this means that somebody are wrong about this. So not all data can be included, but the theory that is able to integrate as many data as possible with as many connections as possible will be the most coherent theory, and then a theory we have good reason to believe. So being aware of this fact that we are integrating data is able to answer some common objections against coherence theory of truth, and using coherence as a criterion. First of all, some say that you need to be connected to reality if you have a theory of truth, not just about what people think. But the connection with reality then is that it is data, our experiences, etc., and that we want to integrate into a coherent theory. So, but it's connection to reality through our mind, because as we have seen, you cannot go outside of your mind. So this is the way that you can connect to reality. And we are not saying that, because that's a common objection, something isn't necessarily true because it's coherent, but that's not what we're saying. We're saying that the theory which is most coherent is also best justified as true. But it could be a more coherent theory that we discover in the future, which is more probably true, but that's a problem for everyone. Could turn out that something in the future is better justified as true. That's an unavoidable fact, which we have seen through all history, of course, can happen. And still, we're asking what is best justified as true today. What do we have best reason to believe today? But we might have to change our mind in the future. Why do we then get a good reason to believe that something is true if it's coherent? Well, I have defined truth as coherence, the most coherent, most possible coherent description of the world is what truth is. So when we have theories that are more and more coherent, then we are closer and closer to the perfect or most coherent description. But of course, as I said, new and more coherent theories might pop up in the future. In practice, a lot of people are using this criterion. Often they say that they don't. They talk about we're doing different tests, we're making predictions, they have all sorts of criteria, but these are different kinds of connections, so it falls under this theory. In practice, you will see that people try to have the most possible coherent theories, which means then to be able to answer as many questions as possible. And that's how they discuss. I can explain this and you can't, etc. They're discussing which theory is most coherent. We do get a good reason to believe that something is true if it is very coherent, because it is very difficult to make a very detailed, coherent theory if it's not true. Try to lie very with a lot of details. It's so easy that something doesn't fit in, but if it's really things fit well together and connected in many ways, then we get a good reason to believe that it is actually because it's describing how reality is. That's what makes it possible to connect all these parts. So when we're talking about connections, we're talking about all kinds of connections. It can be spatial, relating things spatially or logically, or into cause and effect, but any kind of relation, taller than, he's the uncle of that, etc. So all sorts of relations and connections, etc., are making the theory more coherent. And so what we are doing is actually just we're explicating, we are showing the structures that are, and the relations that are in the world when we are making such a theory. And the more coherent it is, the more justified it is as true. Well, isn't it a problem then that people have different truth criteria, and then my theory is good according to my criteria, your theory is good according to your criteria, so why should we listen to you? Well, I said we have this common understanding of the basic concept of truth, so then also the understanding and the criteria of truth that is able to solve the most problems will be best justified. And I think that this is a theory that is able to solve problems better than alternative theories, and I've given the reasons why in this video and the previous.